unanimous consent that the quorum call in progress be vitiated.
Without objection.
And Madam President, it's been called to my attention that there are some people that are trying to respond to the fact that we have such high prices of gasoline at the pumps in a totally unrealistic way, in a way that is class warfare, in a way that doesn't make any sense to anyone, when we have a solution to this problem that we've been talking about for a long period of time. There are some who are trying to say that we're going to have to do something about the subsidies that are given to oil companies, about all of the amount of what they've been doing over the years, and that all of a sudden they're the ones who are responsible for the high price of gas at the pumps. A CRS report was requested by my colleague, Lisa Murkowski. It grew out of frustration with the Democrats' refrain that America has only 3% of the global oil reserves, and therefore, under this view, more drilling and production at home is futile. I think as President Obama has said many times, he says with 3% of the world's oil reserves, the U.S. cannot drill its way to energy security. Well, it can, but it's not 3%. You know, a CRS report came out later and showed, and this is something that people don't want to believe, but it's out there, and it is a fact, that United States of America has the largest recoverable reserves of oil, gas, and coal of any country in the world, more than China, more than Saudi Arabia, more than anyone else. Our problem is that we have a political problem. That is this administration, and it goes really right down Democrat-Republican lines. The Democrats put 83% of America's federal lands off limits to drilling. Of course, that's just fine for the administration because they have made some statements I'm going to read in a minute to demonstrate very clearly that they want to increase the price of gas at the pumps. But the idea that you can do this through regulation, trying to further tax the oil industry, CRS stated tax changes outlined in the President's budget proposal, and I'm quoting now from the CRS, Congressional Review, everyone knows that's completely nonpartisan. They say, quote, would make oil and natural gas more expensive for the U.S. consumers and likely increase foreign dependence. And I was very proud of a couple of the Democrats over there, the only two who came out and were outspoken. Senator Landrieu from Louisiana said, quote, the administration has put forward draconian taxes on the oil and gas industry. It seems very contrary to our stated goal of being more energy sufficient in the United States. Taxing this domestic industry will instead cut jobs and increase our dependence on foreign oil. So I want you to deliver that message again to the administration. We have bipartisan opposition to the increasing taxes on this industry. Mark Begich, Senator Begich from Alaska, said, quote, the President's proposal would cost thousands of jobs in Alaska and across the country. Energy companies are among the businesses investing and creating jobs at a time when our country needs them both, and I will fight any measure in these incentives. Well, I think it should be pretty obvious without even a few of the Democrats coming in, these two, and I appreciate the fact that they did, that you're not going to be able to reduce the price of oil at the pumps by further taxing the oil and gas industry. I mean, it's ludicrous to even think that anyone would suggest that you can increase taxes on the oil industry and the gas industry, and somehow you're going to have energy more available, and you're going to reduce the cost of gas at the pumps. You know, there is a way of doing this that I think is so simple. There's not a person in this country, certainly no one who serves in this body, who back during his or her elementary education didn't learn about supply and demand. Here we are in the United States of America, sitting on more gas and oil than any other country in the world, and we are the only country that doesn't exploit its own natural resources. We're the only country. And if we did, we could be completely independent from the Middle East. We wouldn't have to go outside of this continent in order to supply our needs. And people say, well, you know, if you do that and you start developing, then it's going to take a long time to do. It's going to maybe be 8 or 10 years. Well, that would be fine if because they were saying that 8 or 10 years ago, we could have done it then. But that's not quite true, because the economists have said that if we announce that we're going to go to these areas where we're not exploiting our own resources, I'm talking about the Gulf, I'm talking about the East Coast, the West Coast, I'm talking about the North Slope, Anwar in Alaska, I'm talking about the public lands where 83% of our public lands are off limits for drilling. If we are to announce today that we were going to open up drilling and exploration and production in the United States of America, that price would drop tomorrow. It dropped immediately, because people would know that we are going to be able to use our own resources. And, you know, I hate to say this, but somebody's got to say it. We have an administration that is so wrapped up in saying that one of these days we're going to have all this green energy and all that, that they themselves are on record saying that they don't want, that they want to increase the price of oil and gas. Let's look what happened. The administration, this is Alan Kruger, the Department of Treasury. He said the administration believes that it is no longer sufficient to address our nation's energy needs by finding more fossil fuels. The Obama Treasury Department said, to the extent the lower tax rate encourages overproduction of oil and gas, it is detrimental to long-term energy security. Therefore, you know, we just want to do away with oil and gas. And then here's the best one here. That's the Energy Secretary of President Obama, Stephen Chu, says, quote, somehow we have to figure out how to boost the price of gasoline to the levels in Europe. We have an administration who wants to increase the price of oil and gas, the price of gasoline at the pumps, to be comparable to Europe, which is between $7.5 and $8 a gallon. And I think that obviously that people would know that this is true. It wasn't long ago that President Obama gave his energy speech. In his energy speech, he said, well, there is all this abundance of clean gas that we can use. And then at the end of the speech, he said, but we have some problems in getting the gas out of the ground. He's talking about natural gas in this case, not about oil. And he says, and so I happened to give the response in one of the TV stations, and I said, you know, he says he wants natural gas, and at the same time, he says he wants to end hydraulic fracturing. Let me tell you about hydraulic fracturing, Madam Chairman, Madam President. The hydraulic fracturing started in the state of Oklahoma, my state, in 1948. It's a way of pumping water fluids, in water primarily, into these tight formations. These tight formations mostly are down about a mile to 2 to 3 miles under the surface, and that will allow them to go in and get the gasoline. We have enough gasoline, enough natural gas to take care of our needs for the next 100 years. We just need to use these systems that we have. Now, if you do away with hydraulic fracturing, then that means you're not going to be able to get any of the natural gas out of the system. You can't produce 1 cubic foot of natural gas without using hydraulic fracturing. Now, what did we find out last week? Stephen Chu, Secretary Chu, is going to be in charge of a study to see how dangerous hydraulic fracturing is. Now, wait a minute. This is the same guy that said somehow we have to figure out how to boost the price of gasoline to the levels of Europe. So I would only say this. We actually have 3 problems. We have the problem that we have all this abundance that we're not going after, and then hydraulic fracturing. And then you got to keep in mind, once you get it, we have to refine it. And that's where the EPA is coming in. I stood here at this podium for 9 years talking about the problems that we have with cap and trade. The fact that we can't have a cap and trade system that is going to have the effect of costing the American people the estimates of between $300 and $400 billion a year, and that's supposedly for greenhouse gases. Now, they tried the Kyoto Treaty way back in the 90s, then they tried 7 different times in the Senate floor to pass legislation that would have the same type of cap and trade as we would have if we had become a party to and ratified the Kyoto Treaty. Now, the problem with that is, even if there are people out there, and there are a lot of people, right, a very large percentage of people in America, some 40%, believe that somehow the greenhouse gases are causing catastrophic global warming, and even if that were true, which it is not, but if it were true, that it doesn't make any difference what we do here in the United States of America. I admire the director, the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, Lisa Jackson, who was appointed by our President Obama, because even though, yes, she's way off in the left wing, she's liberal and all of that, but when you ask her a direct question, she gives an honest answer. And she gave honest answers. One of them was, I asked her the question, I said, I think it was, at that time, was the Markey bill. It was one of the cap and trade bills. And I said, in the event that we were to pass a cap and trade bill here in the United States, would that reduce emissions? And her response was, no, it wouldn't, because that would only affect the United States of America. That's not where the problem is. The problem is in India, in Mexico, China. China, right now, they are cranking out 2 coal-fired plants, generating plants, every week in China. So it's going to continue there. In fact, you could argue that it would even be more expensive. It would even be more expensive because or more polluting, if you call CO2 a pollution, because it would go. Our jobs would go to places like China, where they do have this problem. They don't have any emission control. So you have the problem of refining it once you get it. And I see my good friend from is on the floor. He's going to be speaking, I'm sure, to perhaps the same thing, but I only want to mention one thing, that the cap and trade agenda, since they were not able to get it passed, they are trying to do it through the Environmental Protection Agency, through regulations. Lion Oil, based in El Dorado, Arkansas, recently testified before the House Energy and Commerce Committee that it commenced a $2 million expansion of its El Dorado refinery in 2007 with 2,000 construction jobs, but its completion has since been stalled. As Lion Oil Vice President Steve Cousins explained, and I'm quoting now, the uncertainty and the potentiality of prohibitive costs associated with possible cap and trade legislation and EPA's greenhouse gas regulations were the critical factor leading us to delay the completion and expansion. What I'm saying is, even if we are, and I believe we are going to be able to break down this barrier and overcome this mentality that we should not be developing our own resources, but then we also have to have a way of refining that. We can do it, it's within our reach, and we could bring down the price of oil and gas, and certainly gasoline at the pump, by tomorrow. If we were to announce that we're going to stop being the only country in the world that doesn't exploit its own resources. If we go after the oil and gas that is available in the Gulf and the East Coast and the West Coast, our public lands, as well as the North Slope of Alaska, we could be independent from any dependency on the Middle East. And with that, I believe the American people understand that. It goes right back to our elementary school education. It's supply and demand. We have the supply in the United States of America. We've got to open up that supply so that we can use it, and obviously that would lower the price of gas at the pumps. And with that, I would yield the floor.